All right. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I'm going to go ahead and get started. It looks like we still have a few people jumping on, but hopefully over the next few minutes, people will get logged on and get stuff pulled up. And before I really jump into things, I wanted to just cover some basics as far as logistics go for this call. So all of your phone and computer lines are muted and will remain muted for the duration of the call. If you have a question, please submit that under the question tab as part of the control panel on your screen. It's probably off to the right there, because I'll definitely allow time at the end of the webinar to answer as many of those questions as I can. And the Collegiate and Professional Sports Dietitians Association is approved by the Commission on Dietetic Registration. You may have seen that recently in your email and on social media to provide continuing education by registered dietitians or to registered dietitians. So this program is eligible for one CPEU, and you'll receive a CDR certificate along with the PowerPoint slides via Amy Friel within the next day or so. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into it. So my name is Lauren Link. I'm the Director of Sports Nutrition at Purdue University, and wanted to first start, let's see if I can get my slides going. Wanted to start without doing a normal introduction maybe, but more so my media experience and kind of why I have any clout in this area to talk about this topic. So really my first exposure to media was as an athlete at Purdue. Did some video projects with Purdue Athletics when I was an athlete in my last semester, and then the semester after before I started my DI. And I'm glad that video was not nearly as big of a thing, because some of those are hard to watch in hindsight. But that was my first exposure. And then shortly after finishing my soccer career, I actually started doing color commentary and sideline reporting for the Big Ten Network Live and for Big Ten Radio for both soccer and basketball. So that was kind of, again, a fun new exposure, something I'd never done before, but really enjoyed. And I still actually do that a little bit here and there as I have time. And then when I got to Purdue, in my current role, I started Boiler Fuel on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and Pinterest. Although I will definitely tell you, I did not jump straight into that and doing a lot with it. We started to kind of slowly establish it and have continued to build on that. But lots of social media stuff going on with Boiler Fuel at this point. And throughout the years at Purdue, I've been lucky to do a lot of different kind of fun video projects, ranging from our grocery store tour that we did now a number of years ago. That's been a helpful thing to pull from at times. Our Tiny Hands videos, Bite-Sized Nutrition. So a lot of different things. I've been lucky to have a creative department that will humor some of those requests. And then at some point a few years ago, started my Link to Nutrition handle on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, most recently TikTok. Don't get your hopes up on that. I'm a very new TikToker, but yeah, so started that handle, and that's been kind of a totally separate venture that I'll talk about. And then as my role with the board of directors for CPSDA, I'm the communications chair. So I've had the ability to work with Kim, our marketing coordinator, with our social media efforts and just other media efforts that we do with CPSDA. And as some of the stuff that I talk about today, I can tell you it's some of the same stuff we're looking at with CPSDA and always trying to work on those efforts as well. Sorry, let's see. I do teach a social media section at Purdue, Nutrition Communications. And then lastly, kind of totally separate venture has been as an author. A few years ago, I published my first book. It was originally published under the title From Athlete to Normal Human, and then republished as The Healthy Former Athlete. And more recently, also took on some web design, or at least really basic web design, with thehealthyformerathlete.com. So that in a nutshell is kind of my experience up to this point with media and how I came to you today to be in front of you. So do have some objectives. Hopefully we'll hit all of these, but I think you'll see that my goal is definitely to help you think through the content that you're developing, understand how different platforms might work differently for different content, building your following, and really a big theme is going to be managing efficiently, because it does take a lot of time. Okay, so I want to try using a poll really quick, and I'm new at this, so bear with me, but I am curious to just know how experienced we think we are. Let's see. So the poll is open really quick. Just tell me really quick, how experienced do you think you are? Are we total beginners, know a little bit, moderately experienced, or do we consider ourselves like total pro? And we'll just let this go for a few seconds. So I see kind of a variation, which is kind of what I expected. It seems like most of us at least know a little bit, maybe a decent amount, but we do have some total beginners in there, which is what I expected to see. Okay, so I'm gonna give it a few more seconds, but get those in if you haven't. All right, cool. So like I said, a nice little variety, which is awesome. My goal today is definitely to hit all aspects. I did figure we would have some beginners on here, but I wanna give some good information for all this, the whole spectrum. So why is it important? I think most of this won't surprise you. We live in an age of technology. We have a heavy media influence. We know that. Everyone, it seems like, is on some form of social media these days. It's definitely a great way to reach a large number of people quickly. And if your audience is on social media, it's relatable. I work with collegiate athletes mostly. I know that they have their phone attached to their hand at all times. So for me, it's a really relatable way to reach my athletes. It's a great way to market yourself, to market different products if you have products, if it's done well. And to that same token, it can be profitable if it's done well, whether that's helping you build a clientele, maybe trying to work with different brands or companies. It can certainly elicit media opportunities. So the thing I like to stress here is just the if it's done well piece, because I think it's important to consider that if it's done poorly, I think it can be just as harmful as it is helpful. So I do think it's worth putting some thought into it on the forefront of, is this something that I want to do, that I can do, and do it pretty well? And we'll talk a lot about that. So this is more of a personal note, but I do think it's important with all the bad nutrition information out there coming from non-credentialed professionals, and some of those people have hundreds of thousands or millions of followers, which is a bummer. So I do think it can be important for us. I'm guessing most of the people on this call are credentialed individuals or on their way to being so, to combat that. And then, of course, I'm guessing that a good chunk of you are on this call because it's a good way to connect with our athletes right now while we don't have a lot of contact with them, given all the corona craziness. So with that said, as I go through this, I'll kind of jump back and forth from two perspectives, because I'm guessing that we have a lot of people on here who are in a similar boat with what I am with Boiler Fuel, which is building an organizational account. So whether it's a university account, maybe a professional sporting organization, a gym or a hospital group that you're part of that organization, and that account is kind of tied to that. And then on the other hand, building a professional account, for me, that's linked to nutrition. That pun felt too good to turn down when I made that handle. There's a lot of different considerations that go into an organizational account versus a professional individual account. And then I also, when I put this presentation together, because for me with Linked to Nutrition, I'm not trying to build a clientele. Sure, I want to build my following, but I don't have a strong fiscal tie to any of those goals. So I did reach out to Angie Ash, who runs Elite Nutrition, and has a really great following. She has a little bit more of that entrepreneurial perspective. So I did reach out to her, and we chatted through some of this stuff. So I'm going to share her perspective and her page at times as well. Okay, so again, I hope a lot of this is pretty duh information for you, but as far as simple social media rules, since we do have some people who are beginner level, one thing I always tell people is think before you type. I know that seems obvious, and the reason for that is just because you can never permanently delete. In the age of screenshots, even if you posted something and thought, I don't know if I should have posted that, it's out there. As soon as somebody takes a screenshot, it's out there, and things are always living on the cloud forever in theory. So just be really cognizant of that. I kind of have a rule for myself. If I think about it, if I think, oh, should I post that? I just don't, because it's not worth whatever potential repercussions could come of that. And I know it seems kind of silly, like what would I possibly post? But that's my advice. I also think, just generally speaking, not to post opinions about your institution, religion, politics. They're just really polarizing topics. Not that you can't have that, as part of your message if that's what your page is about or that's what you're about. But as a general rule, I think some of those things are good to avoid, and to keep your page positive and drama-free. Of course, we want to be wary of copyright. So we're not, I think in this day and age that has diluted a little bit, because so much stuff is shared and so forth. But of course, we're not using watermarked photos, and we're not taking a recipe from someone's blog or book without crediting them, things like that. So definitely being wary of those copyrights. It's really important to be aware of contractual agreements. If you do have an organizational account, make sure you know who your sponsors are and if there's a part of your contract that would restrict what you're posting in terms of competing products and things like that. For a lot of us at universities, I know Gatorade is a really good example of that versus Powerade or so forth, some of those big companies that sponsor a lot of what we do. So it's just important to understand that. And if you don't know those questions, ask somebody in your business office or that works with your marketing and sponsorships and things like that. Of course, we don't want to breach HIPAA and we don't want to share anything within the medical information realm that would breach that. And this one's important, I think, especially if people are beginners in terms of social media. Be aware that people can see what you like and see what you interact with. And this was not the case probably 5 or so years ago. But now people can absolutely see what you like and see what you interact with. And you've probably gotten a notification, something to the effect of, Sally liked 5 pictures this week with hashtag sports nutrition, whatever. So you can imagine that if, especially from an organizational account, but even your professional one, if you were liking something weird or inappropriate, that could come off as weird and inappropriate. So just something to be aware of. I do advise that you make a professional account separate of your personal account. Not that you have to, and some people I'm sure pull this off well, but generally speaking, probably your friends and family don't want to see all your nutrition stuff. Just like you might not want to share your kids or your family with a bunch of strangers you don't know on a public account. So just something to think about. Okay, so I want to do one more poll really quick since we're pros at this now. Just want to see what social media platform you guys use most. So I just opened that poll. We'll give it another 20, 30 seconds, whether that's Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I threw TikTok on there or something else. I'm curious to see what people are using the most. Okay, I'm going to give it a few more seconds. So if you haven't responded to that poll, do that now. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close it. Kind of what I expected. So I'm glad to see that I was pretty spot on in guessing that most of us are on Instagram, a few people on Twitter, Facebook a little bit. I feel a little bit less pressure now that there's not a bunch of TikTokers out there that I'm going to disappoint. So the good news is I will talk a lot about Instagram as we go forward, but that is helpful. So some considerations. I definitely recommend that you just think about who you're trying to reach. And I know that seems obvious, but who is your audience? And we'll talk more about that in a sec. What's your goal? With making this social media account, what is your goal? And again, we'll come back to both these questions, but the answers to them should really dictate both your platform and your content. And it could be platforms. But if I were working with older individuals, Facebook might be a really great platform. I can tell you now, we still keep our Facebook, but our athletes are not on Facebook. In fact, most college and high school students don't even have a Facebook anymore. So it's important for you to just kind of figure out what platform is your audience on, and that can help kind of guide you in the right direction. I think it's definitely important to ask yourself what you have time for. We're busy people. All of this takes time. So just kind of keep that in mind. And then for organizations, for one, ask the question, are you able to have such an account? I have to imagine that professional sporting organizations might be a little bit more strict about this. There are definitely colleges that don't like departments to have individual accounts. So it's just important to ask the question. And maybe even if you can, if there's any stipulations around that and so forth. So ask the question. And then for some of you who might be on a team of RDs, just consider how you'll manage the efforts and make sure you have a consistent brand. So with that, I don't think it's necessary, but just to give an example, with Boiler Fuel, we have 4 sports RDs on our staff, and we kind of each handle an account. So I handle Instagram for the most part. That's not to say that we don't help each other out and kind of cross over, but what I have always found is that it's really a lot easier, not only just from a logging in standpoint and keeping track of who's posting what, but also just to have that consistent brand. You might have an account that a few RDs run, and you can kind of tell who's posting that, right? Everybody just has a different tone, a different way that they post. And it doesn't mean that it's a bad thing, but in terms of building a consistent brand, it's something to consider just from an efficiency standpoint and a brand standpoint, how you'll manage that. Definitely recommend taking the time to create a professional bio. So just thinking, like, what do you want people to know at a glance when they visit your profile? You don't get very many characters on most platforms. So think about, like, what do I really want people to take away in that few seconds? And even thinking back to your handle, like, does it allude to what you're about? Is it easy to remember? Could people actually find it in a search? Just things to think through. Using a professional picture. Most of us probably have that at this point. If you're a student or an intern thinking like, I don't have a headshot, have your family member or friend take a picture of you against a blank wall with a nice top on, and that's way better off than like the cropping your friend's head out and like the crescent moon vibe going on from a picture standpoint. So use a professional picture. And for individuals, if you also work for an organization, I recommend having a thoughts are my own statement. I know, again, can seem silly and like, well, what would I possibly post? But oftentimes organizations feel more comfortable about that too, because you just never know what people might take offense to. All right, so crafting content for your audience. For one, I would recommend trying to identify a niche audience. And I wish I could credit this quote. I don't remember where I heard it, but if you're trying to reach everybody, you will reach nobody. So I think that's important. It's not to say that you have to narrow down a super small population, but think about like, who are you really trying to reach? And with that said, always remind yourself, like go write this on your like wall somewhere, your mirror. The content you produce is for your audience, not for you. And I have to remind myself of that sometimes too, because if your content isn't relevant to your audience, then your account becomes irrelevant. So I think it's really easy to think like, oh, well, I want to post that, or I like that. Well, think about what your audience wants to see. And if you're thinking, well, how the heck do I know? I would say ask. And this is something that Angie mentioned that she relies on a lot. Use the polls feature, the Q&A feature, and just ask, like, what do they want to know? And for sure, there'll be some trial and error. You'll see that some things do really well and some things kind of flop, and that's fine. But try to figure out what your audience wants. For sure, if you can think about how to create original content, that's ideal. And that was, again, something that Angie mentioned, and she asks, like, what do you guys want? What do you want to see? What do you wish there was more of? So that can go a long way. If you want to use a similar idea, I know we see lots of great ideas on other accounts we follow. You can always, make it your own, but make sure you credit that person, that we're not just going around and making a bunch of like replicas and carbon copies of things that somebody else made. So make it your own. Think of how you could apply that to your audience. And if you don't have time for that, then repost. There's no shame in reposting. There is some shame in, knocking off somebody's information as your own. So just think about how you can utilize ideas that other people have, but also be creative in that. This is something I talk with our students a lot, and our staff talks about a lot. So just craft your message, not just the content, but your message around it for your audience. So use layman's terms. For college athletes, I am not getting too technical, right? I want to keep my message simple. If your account, however, was for like other health professionals or other dietitians, then totally like go crazy with your metabolism vocab or whatever it is. And then, is the information relevant? I already brought that up, but I think it's important. I'll use the example with Boiler Fuel. For us, our audience is our college athletes. Do you think my athletes care about cardiovascular risk and obesity? No, it's not relevant to them. Do I want to share, recipes for kids? No, the vast majority of them don't have kids. Do I want to share RDAs for pregnant and lactating women? No, that's not to most of them, if any of them at times. So just think about, like, is the information relevant? Even if you think it's really interesting, does your audience? And kind of the similar idea, just because so many of us deal so much with recipes and meal ideas, will your audience feel that it's within their ability to make? And do they have those kinds of ingredients? And I tell our students this all the time when they submit recipes that they want to share. I tell them, okay, you're a dietetic student. Think about your dietetic student kitchen in college, and now take that and divide it in half, and then divide it in half again, and like maybe our athletes have that. We're lucky if they have salt. They definitely don't probably have thyme and paprika and coconut flour or whatever. So just think about your audience and make sure that you're providing things that they feel like they can actually make and that they would make. Okay, so I'm not going to spend much time on Twitter, which is good since that's not what most of us are using, but just a few considerations. So Twitter is pretty limiting. You have 280 or less characters, 4 or less pictures, 60 seconds or less video. And so my best advice would be, if you can't fit your message within those constraints, it's probably not the best fit for Twitter. I will usually start by typing out what I want to say and see if I can realistically pare that down and make it work for Twitter. And if I can't, I just scrap it. It's probably not living best on Twitter. And Twitter definitely has less of a historical component, right? It has that live feel. If you think about what a lot of us use Twitter for, I use it as like my main news source, if I'm being honest. Not that it's always reliable, but if there's a big event happening, we're checking Twitter. If we have a few minutes, we might give it a few scrolls and then we're off to the next thing. So it's very much in the moment. And so with that said, I would definitely recommend that you write each tweet as though it's the only one your audience is going to see. So it should really tell the whole picture of whatever message you're trying to get across. You can create a thread, and some people will do that. If you do, you need to respond to your tweet, respond to that tweet, respond to that tweet. And sometimes people will even say thread 1 of 4, thread 2 of 4. But without the thread piece, the Twitter algorithm is such that it's going to separate. So you can't just tweet 3 things in a row and assume that your audience is going to see 3 things in a row. It's probably not going to happen. And let's see. So yeah, what is it best for? News, I think time sensitive content. So things like links do pretty well on Twitter. Maybe it's timely research or some kind of statistic that'll do pretty well. I think in our setting, you know, from like a boiler fuel perspective, menus are great because I want them to see that in the moment, maybe for that day or the week, but I don't need that to live anywhere that they can go reference it weeks later. Announcements for sure. Graphics tend to do decently on Twitter. And I'm going to come back to this later on, but just keep in mind the size of the graphic. It tends to cut off parts of it, so it can make it a little bit less impactful. So not very historical at all, but there is the pinned tweet in the bio area. So from a historical component, that can be helpful. So just as an example for mine, and I'm not big in Twitter, but you see, I have boiler fuel in there. I tag the book, the website. And I personally use my pinned tweet, which you get to pick one, and you can change it around, but I chose to use that pinned tweet as kind of the explanation as to why do I have 2 book titles floating around out there. So if someone comes and checks out my profile, my hope is that they'll kind of know who I am, what I'm generally about, and see maybe that explanation. Okay, so I want to spend more time on Instagram for sure, because I think that's kind of the most popular, definitely within this group, and I think overall right now. And so Instagram, quite simply, is a highly visual platform. And that doesn't mean you have to have a home photography studio like the girl down in the corner, but it does mean that photos should look appealing. And it sounds kind of silly that I even have to like type that out, but photos should look appealing. So just a few little tips. Obviously, this is not a food photography class, but a couple things. Preset filters. I have yet to see one that makes food look better. So whether it's Valencia or Nashville or whatever on Instagram, it's not helping your food photo almost ever. So if you do need to edit a photo, instead of trying to use a filter, use the edit tab next to the filters or just a photo editing app. And I'll mention a couple of those at the end. Natural light goes a hugely long way in photographing food. So if you have the ability, doesn't mean it needs to be in direct sunlight, but during the day, near a window, things like that will make a big difference in terms of the quality of photo. Just generally speaking, lighter pictures tend to do better than darker pictures on Instagram. That's not to say that it's a 100% across the board, but that's why you see a lot of white backgrounds with the dark text on them and things like that. With text, definitely, obviously they need to be readable, but also keep in mind, so we don't want to put a ton of text on the actual photo, especially because if people share that post, it's going from this big in their, in their feed to now this big on the story and making it even harder to read. And on a story, you can't zoom in. So just some things to think about. And to be aware of this part, the algorithm actually reads the image. So when you post to Instagram, it actually files away that it's, girl with cat, soup and sandwich, whatever it might be. And so the algorithm can actually read the image. And so if it's super inundated with text, that actually can confuse the algorithm and they don't tend to do as well. That's also partly why pictures with faces in them tend to do better. It's all just part of the algorithm and there's a lot of pieces to that. And I'll come back to the algorithm in a few. Okay, so then Instagram's kind of divided into 2 chunks, one of which is our feed. So those are the things you're posting that are living on your page. And so less limited for sure. You get 10 or less pictures, a minute or less video. And if you do have a longer video, you can put that to IGTV, but that requires kind of additional prompt. And you may have seen those where you click in, you watch the video and it says finish watching this on IGTV. So that's a different topic. But as far as your feed goes, I recommend not doing too many pictures for the purpose of the things we're posting. 1 to 2 is usually plenty. A lot of times if you do 5+ pictures, people realistically aren't swiping over necessarily to see all of those. So compared to Twitter, Instagram definitely has a more historical perspective, and they talk about the top 9 a lot, that effect of the top 9. And actually kids now are starting to only have a top 9. They will never have more than 9 to 12 pictures. So we'll see where that trend goes, but definitely has a historical perspective. It's recommended to include pictures of yourself. So even if you're running an account that's all about nutrition, food, fitness, whatever, they do recommend including pictures of yourself because it helps your followers feel like you're a real person, that you're not just food floating through their feed, that they actually kind of get a feel for who you are and that you exist. So obviously you can do whatever extent of that you're comfortable with. And there is a much higher character limit for Instagram, so 2,200 characters as opposed to 280 with Twitter, but we want it to be digestible, right? So one thing was helping your audience break it up, and I'll show you an example. So these two are the exact same caption, but this one, I broke it up, right? And so hopefully, I know everyone's muted, but hopefully we would all chime in that we agree that the second one is a lot easier to read than the first one. Emojis, I think, can help. Depends on your population a little bit. Within reason, it shouldn't be probably hieroglyphics where people are trying to translate what, okay, wait, that emoji is what? But they can help kind of jazz it up, give it a little color, whatever. You may have seen different fonts, people using cursive, bold, things like that in their Instagram captions. That just requires a font generator, which you can do on a website, you can do as an app. If you search Instagram font generator, you'll see some options for that, and that has to be copy and pasted into your caption. So I use the Notes app in my phone to type these out. For one, it eliminates the possibility, the very sad realization of when you answer a text or something in the middle of typing your caption out and Instagram closes and you lose it, which is a bummer. But it also just kind of helps see the whole picture, see the whole message. I use the dots between kind of paragraphs or to divide things out. You wouldn't have to, but in my experience, it helps Instagram recognize the indentation there. It's not always great about that for whatever reason. So just some thoughts in terms of as you post things to your feed. Okay, so then the other piece of Instagram is your story. Stories live for 24 hours and then they disappear. And so in that sense, I think it's kind of similar to Twitter. What is it good for? Well, time sensitive things. So it's a great place for menus. Again, if you're posting sales that maybe the local grocery store has, or the local Jimmy John's is running a special or something, you don't necessarily need that stuff to live on your feed forever, right? But you could totally put that on your story, encourage them to take a screenshot if they want, announcements, things like that. I think the stories are also a great way to show behind the scenes. For Boiler Fuel, we do a lot of food demos with our athletes. So even though we'll post to the feed some shots, some still shots of the food demo, love to have some behind the scenes going on in the live moment, showing our athletes doing various stuff or at other events like that. So it's a great way to do that. And I think it's a great way to interact with your audience. And I think this is especially a consideration for right now with all of the Corona craziness. Some things to think about: tag people. So people can only formally share your story if they're tagged in it. So if you have athletes that you're posting their plate or posting them doing something, tag them so they can share that. Use the polls, test their knowledge, do a little Q&A where they answer different nutrition questions, or open up a Q&A for them to ask you questions. Using Instagram Live, we've just dabbled in this a little bit, but I think it's kind of a fun way to be interactive with your athletes. And again, right now it's kind of a cool time to use it, where they can live ask questions. They can chat with you, they can chat with other athletes that might be on your live feed. So a lot of different ways to use the story feature. And you can share your own post to the story. I recommend, you know, if I post something to Link to Nutrition, I will often then share it to my story. You can do the whole like new post, click here, totally fine. I don't usually, but if nothing else, it's getting a whole other classification of people that might not go through their feed or might not get to my post in their feed, but they might see it on the story. You can share other people's posts. And if you're wondering, okay, like, how do I do that for the beginners? If you wanted to share with the world how ridiculous keto mayo is, for instance, you would just click on that little paper airplane guy, and that'll give you the option to share to your story or to send to other people. So then lastly with the story, you know, it is a live kind of in the moment thing, but you can utilize the highlights section to add a historical component. And so there's a 100 clip limit for highlights. I would suggest doing less than that. If you think about just yourself using highlights, if it's a recipe highlight and there's 100 posts, am I realistically going to click through 90 posts to get to the last recipe? I probably wouldn't. So I recommend, if you do use highlights, to just kind of keep tabs on it. And if you start to get to where you have a lot, then make some subcategories. Maybe instead of recipes, it becomes breakfast recipes and dinner recipes or whatever. And so, you know, for CPSDA, for instance, the highlights have been a really nice way to kind of historically look back at the takeovers, the member takeovers, or get a peek at the different events that we have, APW, BLW, and so forth. So I know Angie also uses the highlights feature, and I think she does a nice job of different categories she has there. So if anyone's wondering, okay, what the heck are the highlights? They're the little guys that live above your feed on your page. All right, so last thing on Instagram, definitely has more of a historical aspect, right? We talked about that. And so I always tell people, like, if I'm looking at your profile, it should kind of give me an idea of what you and your account's all about. And so I want to show an example. The video is a little bit crazy, but if I'm searching Elite Nutrition, I pull up her profile. Most of us are going to do what? We're going to scroll down and say, okay, yeah, cool. Like, I see her top 9 to 12 posts. And if it's me, I'm doing a couple scrolls. So maybe I'm clicking into a couple of these things, like, oh, cool, yeah, I like that. Yep, I'm scrolling, and then I think, okay, cool. I either decided I liked what I saw or I didn't, and maybe I'm following her or whatever. So my point with this video is that was, to me, a normal amount of scrolling that I might do. That the furthest down post I got, that was September of 2019. That's, I mean, 6 months ago, right? So it absolutely is a historical platform. And I think it's important to just think about, people are going to your profile. They are going to look, you know, a few swipes down, most likely. So think about kind of what that total picture you're creating is. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a sec, but for sure you can do a theme. And some of you, I'll show an example in a minute, but you probably have accounts that you follow that kind of follow a theme. It takes a lot of work. And so Angie shared, you know, if you go back far enough in her feed, she actually has a couple times where she followed a pretty rigid theme. And she shared that anecdotally, it did not make a big difference to her in terms of building her following, building engagement, building a clientele, and so forth. She also shared that it was a lot more stressful. And I would agree, even just from a light theme idea, it becomes like, oh, you know, I want to post this, but I have to post 2 more of this before I can post that one. So it doesn't mean that it's bad, but something to think about. It's a lot of work. So my advice, if you don't want maybe quite that level of commitment to the theme game, I just recommend trying to provide a variety of angles, perspectives, color, and so forth, that makes it a lot easier to kind of keep your page fresh and live in the moment to what you want to share. And you could consider a calendar of your different content or how you want to engage with your followers. Just depends on if you want to put that time in up front. For an account like CPSDA, it's a lot easier to have a calendar with, you know, we have events coming up and we have certain things that we know are happening, versus Link to Nutrition, you know, it's a lot, it would be a lot different thought process. So just something to think about. Okay, so I talked about themes and I just wanted to share kind of a spectrum. So this is Sarah Grace Meth. She's a very successful dietitian, has built a huge following on social media, and she, at least at different times, has done a pretty rigid theme. So, I mean, it looks awesome, right? We see the same branding, same fonts, kind of every other deal. That would be an example of a very structured theme. To kind of take a little step up or down, however you want to look at it, This account, I mean, definitely has a color palette going on, right? Some similar subject matter, really attractive looking pictures, and definitely a heavy theme feel, though not like every other necessarily. These next two, I think, are just a good example. The pictures look awesome, right? They're really great pictures. They're attractive. They look delicious. They're not a formal theme maybe, but we see all the same background, you know, all the white background, all the same dishes, the same Tupperware. So looks great. And if you can have that level of commitment, awesome. But you can imagine if either of these accounts posted a picture with their wood kitchen table as the background, it would stick out like a sore thumb, right? So it doesn't mean that it's good or bad, just something to think about. It is kind of that commitment if you're going to go with a heavy theme. So then to take a couple more steps down from the theme, I thought this was just a good example of a page. We definitely kind of see a color palette going on, but a lot looser. There's a lot of different, you know, variety, angles, and so forth. But if you're scrolling and you follow this person, you probably kind of recognize, like, oh yeah, that's Pickup Limes. And then one further step down, I think Angie's is a good example again, and I would say Link to Nutrition is similar, that a lot looser, a lot of different angles and so forth, and gives you a little bit more freedom. So just some examples to kind of illustrate what I mean with the theme or lack of. All right, so how to build a following. I'm sure some of you are definitely interested in that. So I would ask yourself, what's your goal? And I mentioned that a little bit earlier, but what is your goal in growing your following? I can tell you with Boiler Fuel, like, sure, followers are great, but if I had 500 versus 5,000, I don't care as long as those 500 are my student athletes, right? Because I'm not growing that account for any reason other than to make sure that my student athletes are going there for information. Organic following over manufactured all day, every day. You know, you'll see avenues where you can buy followers, essentially, buy engagement. And that manufactured is not going to really elicit any actual engagement. And so I don't recommend that. So some strategies, definitely recommend posting consistently. I would say at least a few times a week, all the way up to daily if it's manageable. I do, for Link to Nutrition, try to post daily. I don't always get that. And if you find me on the low end of this, it's because it's a crazy, crazy week. But posting consistently definitely can go a long way in helping you build a following. Posting timely content definitely helps. Whether that's, you know, holidays, of course, is kind of obvious. Right now, I'm sure we're all posting like crazy about coronavirus and how we can help our athletes and our clients manage that. It could even just be like kind of viral memes or a viral video. If there's something that you can do with that, it can really kind of take off, and that can help build a following. I mentioned earlier posting original content, and Angie talked about that a lot, just looking for like, what gaps do you see? What do you wish was more, you know, that there was more of out there? What do your athletes want? Using popular hashtags. So on Instagram, they absolutely serve a purpose. Even though it can feel silly, I know, to have the big chunk of hashtags. There's a 30 hashtag limit. On Link to Nutrition, I do usually plop a good chunk of hashtags in there. Some people do it at the very end of their caption. So I personally do it as a comment on the picture. Whatever you do, I mean, they can serve a purpose, but they need to be popular hashtags, right? Things that you actually think would A, tie to that picture, and B, people would be searching for, whether they're following that hashtag, whether they just maybe click on it, oh, sports nutrition, I wonder what's there. What you don't want to use is hashtags that nobody's clicking on. Like, probably, I have to imagine nobody's clicking hashtag Lauren Link is awesome. Maybe, but probably not. So using popular clickable hashtags. Interacting with your social community goes a long way. So respond to messages when you get them. Reply to comments, like and follow other appropriate content, share people's stories, share people's posts, and then tag people when appropriate. And I mentioned this briefly earlier, but this for us, for Boiler Fuel, has been a huge way to engage our athletes. Young people right now generally will share a story if they're tagged in it. They might not add any other detail, but they'll share it. And what is that doing? Well, they follow their teammates. They follow other athletes. They see that and think, oh, Boiler Fuel, I've heard them talk about that, I'm gonna follow. So it really can help kind of build your following by tagging people and having them share with other people that might be interested. Create shareable content. I struggled to define this, but just thinking about, like, what would people share or save, and what would you share or save? It should be stuff that you think other people are interested in, like what are people sharing to their following? And then of course, the goal is to generate engagement. And I mentioned the algorithm earlier. In a nutshell, Instagram's algorithm is all about how much engagement a post gets early. So when I post that, is it getting comments quickly? Is it getting likes quickly? Is it getting saved, shared, and so forth? So it's important to know the algorithm, and I'll come back to that one more time. Just some thoughts when you post and how. So I want to give a couple quick examples to just tie some of this together, and I think this is a good exercise for you to go through with your accounts. So with Linked Nutrition, who am I trying to reach? For sure, the answer is athletes and former athletes. I know this is not niche at all, and I am disregarding my own advice, but like the general public for me is an area where I think some of my stuff applies. Other dietitians and health professionals. What is my goal? I want to be a source of evidence-based nutrition information and fight that misinfo that I talked about. I'm big on healthy but balanced. Balance is a heavy theme in my page. Promoting my book for sure has been one of the big goals of it. And then some, kind of side goals, that athlete transition niche. I do try to do some food waste and environmental stuff, a little humor. So what does that boil down to? Content, quick, easy recipes, meal planning and prep, things like that. Sports nutrition info. The book promo, I'm not going to shove it down their face, but you'll see it pop up throughout my page. Maybe some insight into sports nutrition as a career, and then a little bit of that personal insight. And so if we look, I just took a couple screenshots. I think generally speaking, if you look at any 12 frames on Linked Nutrition, you'll see this general vibe. You'll see some balanced plates. You'll see my face a little bit in there. You'll see some of that text on there that's sharing who knows what message. So a little bit of the marketing madness stuff that I have been trying to highlight. So hopefully that kind of illustrates that. With Boiler Fuel, same idea, but different answers. Who are we trying to reach? The Purdue student athletes. Like I said, that's the only people that we really are, trying to reach at any given time. What's our goal? To be easily accessible, source of evidence-based information, promote habits that promote performance and well-being, participate in the Purdue community. And so our content is going to be some similar stuff. We want to highlight our athletes, we want to highlight our staff, sports nutrition information, so on and so forth. And so again, at any given moment, if you look at our feed, you'll see a lot of Purdue athletes, hopefully learning those life skills and things. You'll see lots of bright and colorful food. You'll see our staff tucked in there. Even right now during COVID, it's been a little bit harder to get our athletes' faces in there, but so more education versus hands-on education, but you still hopefully see the same kind of idea. Okay, so last few things, so we leave some time for questions. Growing your brand. For organizations, you got to know your media package. Like you don't get to choose your brand. You're just an offshoot of the bigger brand. And so if you don't know that, ask. I can tell you in my office, if I ever get back there, I have a Purdue brand book in my side drawer that has all the up-to-date graphics, fonts, Pantones, etc. that we can use. And so if you don't know what a Pantone is, this is a screenshot and Pictochart, but it's this little guy up here. That CEB 888 is Purdue Gold, and I have some of those memorized at this point. So ask your creative services for that information. I'm sure they'll happily share it, because the thing that kills creative people slowly inside is when people use things inappropriately, like the wrong Purdue Gold, the old graphic, things like that. So regardless of if it's a more formal education or handout, maybe like this one, again, we're using the correct Pantones always. We're a little looser with fonts with our stuff, but we use generally the same few and the same font families. You'll always see a up-to-date Purdue logo that has not been stretched or distorted. So those are the kind of things to consider. Even this basic, it might be worth it to ask to get some templates created, especially right now if they've got time, if we're being honest. This is awesome for utilizing your students and volunteers. If they can just plug and chug and have it look really good still, that's a win-win for everybody. So just some things to consider from an organizational standpoint. Individuals, it's harder because you have to determine what you want your brand to be. Not that it has to be super rigid or super decided all at once, but think about like if you are, making some graphics using color schemes that are similar. If you use filters, use the same couple fonts and so forth. The goal can kind of be that if people are scrolling, like I said earlier, do they just generally know as they scroll that that's linked to nutrition posting or whoever. I keep talking about this, make things shareable. You want them to be shareable, and as you do, make sure you include a logo if you have one, or a watermark. For me, I'll slap link to nutrition on a graphic that I've made, because my hope is that people are sharing it, and as they share it, people say, oh, I like that. Who made that? Link to nutrition, and it draws them back to my page. And we kind of already talked about that. Post with your entire page and brand in mind, not just a single post at a time. Not to say that you have to always have this huge big picture in your head, but it can kind of be on the back burner, if nothing else. Okay, so I know this is a topic on the listserv, and I think people mentioned these too, but creating aesthetically pleasing content, I highly suggest Canva or Piktochart. I use both, although truthfully I use Piktochart more. I've just used it for years and years at this point. Both have good free versions, but personally I suggest using a pro version if you want to use it a lot. And I know more about Piktochart again, but they have a pro version for only $40 a year if you sign up as an educator. And I think we're all educators for the most part. So I think that's an easy thing to validate. So gives you more options, definitely suggest those. And both of these have social media templates. So I truthfully use Piktochart and or Canva for like everything. So if I'm making handouts for my athletes, like a PDF, I'm using these. For social media, definitely. For a slideshow, sometimes. So just something to think about. I highly recommend using the social media templates because they're the right size. And I'm going to pick on myself to show this example. So this was a handout we made and sent to all of our athletes early on in the quarantine craziness. And this was a PDF. I went through and I made it, I squished it down into a Instagram size. But then what does that do when I put it on Twitter? It's not great, right? It's fine, and we don't spend quite as much time on Twitter. It kind of gets the short end of the stick at times, but think about that. Like if you have time and you can make a better fit there, that would be ideal. Not quite as bad, but this was another handout. I had a really hard time squishing it down any shorter. It's just a lot of info on a page, and so it cuts off there. It also cuts off on Instagram. You can see that top middle, it cuts it off there, and it doesn't look awful. If you click into it, they can see the whole image, but it doesn't look as great on a feed as if it was the appropriate size. Yeah, so something to think about. Couple last examples. This is a good example. So CPSDA, same post on Instagram versus Twitter. Those are the correct size. They look really good because they were formatted in the correct size. And so don't make it a guessing game. Just use the appropriate size for different platforms. And obviously you have to think about what you have time for in terms of making all these different versions. But okay, so creating a business account, you can switch back and forth. So I definitely recommend that you at least try a business account. I tried to think of some cons, and honestly, the only one I could come up with is that you can't use music on stories, which is a big bummer for me because I think that's fun. But otherwise, though, the pros are you can use paid advertising if that's something you want to look into, and especially if you're really trying to use it to grow a clientele or sell a product. You can link things in your story, although you can only do that at over 10,000 followers. And you get insights, and these are huge. So I'm going to show you an example. Okay, so if I'm on Link to Nutrition, I'm a business account, I click into my insights and I can see my audience. So I can see how many followers I have, okay, cool. And I can see the general growth, and my experience has always been that it kind of ebbs and flows. You might gain some, lose a little, gain some, lose a little. That's just how it goes. I can see where they're located. So what top cities and countries are my followers in? What age are they? Not a huge surprise there for me. I can see that it's mostly women, not a huge surprise there either. And then at the bottom, I can actually see, okay, what days are my followers most active, and even down to what hour of that day are they most active. And so this is important because earlier I told you that Instagram's algorithm prioritizes things based on how quickly they get engagement, right? So if I'm looking at this, I see that most of my top cities are Central or Eastern Standard Time. And I can see what times my followers are most active. So if I post something when most of my followers are asleep, it's not going to get any engagement, right? And so it's going to get buried. And yeah, some people will see it and fine, but it's not going to get nearly the same engagement that it might had I put a little thought into when I wanted to post it. A couple other examples, if you click into the activity tab, you can actually see, okay, how many accounts were reached. In this week that I took a screenshot of, 8,000 some. 70,000 impressions that week. That means that they saw my story or post 70,000 times that week. If we keep scrolling, we can actually see how many interactions. So, you know, whether that's profile visits, actually clicking on the website. And I can even see by post. So in this case, this is by far, I think, probably the most popular post I've had. Almost 4,000 likes, 55 comments. It was shared 2,500 times. It was saved 1,400 times. 16,000 accounts were reached from that post, most of which weren't following me. And so you can see I got 73 followers and so forth. So it's really helpful. I mentioned that some of it's trial and error, right? As you try to figure out like what works, what doesn't, what do my followers want? The insights are huge for that. So I definitely recommend them, at least dabbling with them if you are not. And like I said, you can switch your account to be business. Okay, so this really is the last couple of things. In terms of managing things efficiently, definitely want to link your social media accounts. Kind of gives a total picture because like we talked about, they're best for different things in some situations, and to maximize efficiency. So for us, you know, our Instagram posts automatically post to Facebook and often to Twitter. I can tell you I will never spend extra time on a Facebook post for Boiler Fuel because most of our followers are not on there. But I can efficiently say share to Facebook. And if some people are following that, great. It's probably like our athletes' parents. Same with Twitter. We'll definitely post some stuff to Twitter separately. But if I can quickly share that to Twitter and have my followers see, oh, they have an Instagram, cool. That maximizes efficiency. Helpful apps. You guys will get the copy of the slideshow and I'll make sure to actually write these out. If you're really into scheduling things up front and have a chunk of time you could sit down, Angie shared a couple of these. I think she used Buffer at some points. I have dabbled with Plan, but truthfully have never gotten super into scheduling. These essentially all let you write your tweet or compose your Instagram post and schedule when you want it to post. So it's kind of nice if you have the time up front to put into that, so that it's not in the moment, oh shoot, my followers are on at 8 p.m. and I need to post that right now. These can help with that, but do take some time up front. There are hashtag generators if you have a hard time thinking of hashtags. I have not used any of these, but they could be helpful if you're like, man, I don't know what hashtags are popular right now or what are cool. Definitely, like I said, I recommend using a photo or video editing app if you're doing some of that. I use Snapseed to add text and things like that. Angie mentioned Fonto, which is that red one on the left. The rest are video editing apps. And like I said, I'll send those names out. And then reposting apps. Like I mentioned, if you don't have time sometimes for your own content development, repost someone else's that you like. And so there's a lot of repost apps out there. I use Repost at the top, but either of those are good options. And then a couple time savers. I can tell you it takes a long time to actually sit down and think of 20-ish hashtags, even if you use the same handful. So I use text replacement, which means quite literally in my iPhone, in the settings, I go to keyboard and I put in text replacement. I typed it out one time, 20 or so hashtags, and I saved that as sports nutrition. So now if I go on anything, if I'm on my Instagram caption and I put hashtag sports nutrition and hit space, it will plug in all of those hashtags. So I just have a couple different groupings. I think I have sports nutrition. I think I have a recipe one, and I'll still add, maybe I'll add a few extras that apply directly to that post, but that's a huge time saver for me, right? You could do a similar idea, would just be to use your notes app and save a chunk of hashtags as a note and go in and copy and paste them and post them that way. So a couple time savers there. I already mentioned I don't recommend using the apps that generate the likes and followers. Okay, so like I mentioned, there's lots of other media platforms. I'm not going to get into any of these. I do think at some point, I think it's important to just really be aware of what your audience is using. I have this bad feeling that TikTok is what we're going to need to somehow do more on because our athletes are using it more and more. We do use Pinterest a little bit. For us, it's just kind of a nice place that all of our recipes live. So if athletes ask like, hey, do you have any crockpot recipes? Yeah, go check out our Pinterest. There's 50. So we use that in that sense. Maybe we'll see what we do with TikTok, but just be aware that there's a lot of platforms out there and that if you're gonna put time into this stuff, make sure that it's with a platform that your athletes are actually on or that your clients are actually on. Okay, last little blurb here is just, I think this is important in the setting of social media. it's so easy to compare, right? And oh, they have so many followers. Why don't I have that many followers? Oh, like they're doing that at Boiler Fuel. Why aren't we doing that? It just all comes back to your audience, right? It doesn't mean that we can't be inspired by things that we're doing, we see colleagues doing and use that kind of inspiration to do our own thing. But it also doesn't mean that what you're doing is right for my athletes and vice versa. So just, I think that's important to remember across the board with social media, not just around sports nutrition, but in general. And with that, I'm pulling up the questions now. So we do have a little bit of time. Let's see. Okay, so any examples of ways to reduce the stress of taking on social? I think hopefully the last little bit there about some of those time management hacks can help. I think if you have time early on to maybe put together a few different, kind of compile a little, I don't know, little pot of things that you could pull from, that can help. But I can tell you, it is sometimes stressful. It takes a lot of time. So I think the reposting can help. Like, don't feel like you always have to generate your own content all the time. Pull from others, figure out what your audience likes, and anything that can save you time. Like I said, the hashtags, whatever it is, I recommend it, and using templates and things like that. Can you explain what TikTok's platform is like? Is it worth to attempt it to reach athletes? I can, like I said, I've made 2 TikToks, but it's a video platform, and you essentially piece together chunks of video. So maybe similar to Snapchat or things like that, except that I could film 15, or I could film 3 seconds here, go film 3 seconds here, an hour later film 3 more seconds. And so if you're really creative, you can piece together some kind of cool videos. I've seen things all over the board for TikTok. Some people are using it to do recipes, which is kind of fun. Some people are just using it to do silly voiceovers. I'm not doing a great job explaining it, but in a nutshell, it's a video platform, and kind of the unique piece of TikTok is that they're quick. You can kind of edit and splice things together in a unique way. I hope that helped a little bit, but probably not that much. Let's see. Looking at other questions. How do you tag athletes while maintaining HIPAA compliance? That's a good question. It's fair. I think it just depends on what the subject matter is. And most of the time, I would just recommend asking, right? So a lot of the stuff we tag athletes in is going to be more along the lines of like their plate that they texted me, right? Like, hey, Lauren, check this out. I made this. Hey, Lauren, I'm at the grocery store. Check out my cart. Things like that, I wouldn't be worried about from a HIPAA compliance standpoint. And even, if we're doing a food demo and I'm filming Bob and Tom cooking the eggs or whatever, I don't have an issue posting that either, because it's a team. It's been approved through our compliance department, right? Whether it's RARA hours or CARA hours. I think if you're ever worried about that, I would just ask the athlete, right? It can be as simple as, hey, do you mind if I tag you in this? It's usually though something that they've sent us. And I think it also just depends on the relationship you have with that athlete and that team, and that could help. But I would say there's probably a lot of different scenarios. If you're ever in question, just ask the athlete, like, hey, I would love to share this on social media. Do you mind? Somebody asked, how do you film your cooking demos? A little bit with our hair on fire, if I'm being honest. But I usually will literally just do it on my phone, take quick little blurbs. We, at least for us, don't formally film unless that team is filming for like a feature. Then they might have their actual creative person in there with a camera. But for us, if I have students helping me, or if we have a couple staff members in there, if we got a few down minutes, we're grabbing our phone, we're taking a picture of them cutting this, we're taking a quick video of them cooking this up or whatever. So it's not formal. And I think the athletes kind of prefer it that way in terms of the stuff we're tagging them in, and they have fun with it there. Somebody asked what website I use to create the brand book. And so I probably didn't explain that super well, but the brand book is something that Purdue creates. So it's like a physical book that they have that has like all the acceptable logos, all the acceptable colors to use, you name it. So it's not anything I created, that was provided to me. So I think what I would ask if you're part of any big organization would just be to ask whether they had something formal like that. I bet that most of them do. If they don't, I bet they have something similar or informal that would have kind of the suggested fonts and Pantones and things like that. Somebody asked if you can link Pinterest and Instagram. That's a really good question. And to my knowledge, no. But I'll put an asterisk there that it's possible. I just don't know how. That I've never noticed that that was an option, but I don't believe that you can link those. I think you could do it the opposite way. I talked about sharing my Instagram post to Facebook and sharing my Instagram post to Twitter. I think you could take a pin and link it in some ways to Instagram. It would depend on how you do that with your account. So you could put it as like a link in profile. You could put, change your link in your profile. We've talked about advertising our Pinterest a little bit on our Instagram just to make sure that our athletes know it's there. So we could do that, but I don't think there's a lot of great ways to formally link them that I'm aware of, especially because Instagram is kind of a pain in the butt with links in terms of actually having a great way to add links. It does not have a lot. So hopefully that was at least a little bit helpful. I'm sorry if there's a better way to link those two. Someone can shoot me an email after and I can let everybody know. Okay, and then I think the only other question I'm seeing is give examples of the top 9 on the feed. Hopefully the examples that I gave with like the theme and stuff maybe elaborated that a little bit. But yeah, the top 9 is literally just if I go to somebody's profile, it's the top 9 pictures I'm seeing. And I mentioned that some athletes and some younger kids now are like literally just having 9 pictures. And then if I posted a new one, they would just delete an old one to keep it at 9. But that's all the top 9 means. It's just like, what are the top 9 pictures that I'm seeing if I go to your profile? So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, and then let's see. We've had difficulty having our athletes engage with us and answer questions or respond when we ask for input. So things like show us your recipe. Do I have any recommendations? It's a really good question. And we also, I mentioned we dabbled with Instagram Live. We were kind of like laughing at ourselves afterwards because we didn't have great engagement. I think it's all just about trial and error and figuring out what works for your athletes. For us, we've had a little bit more success in terms of engagement just within teams. And especially right now, we're trying to challenge our athletes, like, can we make it competitive? Because they don't have any other competitive outlet right now. So can we make it competitive, whether it's, if you follow Boiler Fuel, you might have seen that we've shared a lot of posts that our athletes are tagging us in because they get points if they tag us. So that's one example. I don't know if it would work for your athletes, it might, but to get competitive can be kind of fun, to promote it within the team first versus just hoping that they see it on your social media. I would say we do a lot of talking about it within each team. So like when I'm talking to soccer or volleyball, I'm saying, hey, make sure you tag us on Boiler Fuel. Hey, did you know we're doing a live Instagram on Boiler Fuel? Things like that maybe can help. And I think the more you can get a few people engaged, it kind of normalizes it. They know that, oh yeah, Bob, was reposting them the other day. So I think it's a slow process. The other thing I'd say that I didn't think of earlier, but that has kind of helped us is just the brand consistency even amongst our department. So we talk a lot about, like if we have a blank screen and we don't have any other education up, we have Boiler Fuel. Our logo includes Boiler Fuel. I talked about making your handle searchable and memorable. If I was asking my athletes to type like dietitian in, we all know how that would go, right? Nobody in the world can spell dietitian correctly. So, but they see Boiler Fuel everywhere. And so I think that's one other thing I would maybe point out, especially for organizational stuff, is that for us, at least with Boiler Fuel, it's not just an effort on social media. It's like a cohesive effort across the board. So we're using the same fonts and colors and whatever on our slides at our fueling stations. When we have handouts that we're giving teams, at the bottom, it says contact your sports dietitian and at Boiler Fuel and the Instagram logo or whatever. So it's little things I think that could help maybe over time too, maybe not necessarily in this exact moment. But that brand building for us has helped too. And I think I would like to say most of our athletes would at least probably recognize boiler fuel and know what we mean when we say that. So that could help. That was a really long-winded answer, but hopefully that helps a little bit. Okay, I'm trying to see if there was any other questions. I'm not seeing any. We're just about at time anyway. It'll probably kick us off shortly, I bet. So if you didn't get your question answered or you didn't get it submitted, let me know. Shoot me an email. My email is just my name, laurenlink@purdue.edu. And I will do my best to get back to people in a reasonable, timely manner. So hopefully that helped a little bit, and hopefully I got to your questions. But otherwise, last thing I'll just say is thanks for tuning in. Hopefully this helps in terms of this crazy time we're living in and that everyone is staying safe and healthy. And yeah, we'll post a recording of this call to the webinar library on sportsrd.org. And you'll receive the CDR certificate along with the slides from Amy Friel within the next day or so. But otherwise, thanks for tuning in. Have a great day, everybody.